I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, September 8th. We begin tonight with the end of an era, the passing of our Queen. Queen Elizabeth II has died at the age of 96. Buckingham Palace made the announcement. This was hours after saying the Queen had been placed under medical supervision over concerns about her health. Members of the royal family, including Princes William and Harry, rushed to Scotland to be at her bedside. Queen Elizabeth was the longest reigning monarch in British history, serving 70 years on the throne. Her 73-year-old son, Charles, automatically becomes monarch. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says the Queen was one of his most favorite people in the world, and he will miss her enormously. The late Queen Elizabeth regularly expressed her affection for Canada in her many visits to the country. We'll now take a look at the Queen in Canada.
The rising generation, whether English or French speaking, could show so clearly that you belong to one great Canadian family.
The year when all Canada looks back over 100 years of growth and solid achievement.
There could be no better moment for me as Queen of Canada to declare again my unbounded confidence in the future of this wonderful country. For the past 3 years, this rich expanse has been yours in its most precious sense, and it bears the name you chose, that speaks of your ancestors, Canada's original citizens. During my lifetime, I have been a witness to this country for more than half its history since Confederation. I have watched with enormous admiration how Canada has grown and matured while remaining true to its history, its distinctive character, and its values. This nation has dedicated itself to being a caring home for its own, a sanctuary for others, and an example to the world. God bless you all, and God bless Canada.
Well, as momentous as the death of Queen Elizabeth II is after 70 years on the throne, Canada's governance will continue. The monarch remains the constitutional head of state in this country, no matter who is filling the role at any given time. Now, that's according to Philippe Legas. An associate professor of international affairs at Carleton University, he is also an expert on the role of the Crown in the Westminster system of government. It means the succession from the Queen to her eldest son, the now King Charles, is automatic. Now, this is without any disruption to governing bodies that sit in her name or to legislation, oaths, or other legal documents issued in her name. Dr. Lagasse says this transition does not require any action on Canada's part. Forum Daily Week in Review will be right back after a short break. The United Nations is accusing China of serious human rights violations. This comes in a long-awaited report examining the crackdown on Uyghurs and other mostly Muslim ethnic groups. Human rights groups have accused Beijing of sweeping 1 million or more people from the minority groups into detention camps. This is where many have said they were tortured or sexually assaulted. The UN Human Rights Report adds the weight of the world body to conclusions from advocacy groups and media outlets. But it's not clear what impact it will have. China has denounced the assessment as a fabrication cooked up by Western nations. Well, joining us now to unpack the report and its impact is Dr. Charles Burton, an expert on China and a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Dr. Burton, welcome back to Forum Daily.
It's good to speak with you, Nima.
Now, unfortunately, human rights abuses in Xinjiang have already been brought to light by advocates and journalists, including Forum Daily. So what would you say is the significance of this UN report?
Well, in addition to advocates and so on, the Parliament of Canada passed a unanimous resolution that what's going on with the Uyghurs does constitute genocide under the UN Convention on Genocide, which Canada and China are both ratified. So I do think that having the UN sanction on the idea that what China is doing in Xinjiang violates a wide range of international law, not just the Convention on Genocide, but the Convention Against Discrimination Against Women, the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the Convention Against Torture, and so on, does make it clear to China and the international community that what China is doing is simply completely unacceptable to the world and requires further investigation. The UN has not been able to determine whether what China's doing amounts to genocide, but they really need more information and China to be more forthcoming and allowing more access for UN special rapporteurs and other UN agencies to get in there and verify what's going on, and for China to respond to the international community's concerns and release those Uyghurs from the concentration camps, which the UN has verified are true because they see the satellite evidence and have other sources of information that suggest that the Chinese government is not being honest about their program of trying to eliminate the Uyghur culture, civilization, and language and religion.
And was there any new information revealed in this report compared to what we already know from human rights advocacy groups and journalists?
Well, I think the main thing is the analysis and the statement by the UN that even if China is concerned about the potential of Uyghurs participating in terrorist activities in China and other parts of the world, that it's unacceptable for China to suppress the religious rights of the Uyghurs just because they feel if they get them to cease their belief in Islam, that they will then no longer be inclined to support terrorist causes. And I think it's pretty clear to the rest of the world outside China that there is not an issue of pervasive terrorist activity among the Uyghur minority. What they mostly want is their language, culture, and cultural rights, and the right to political representation. And China wants to suppress any notion that the Uyghurs are unhappy with being ruled by another ethnic group from a capital very far away. After all, Kashgar in Xinjiang is closer to Budapest than it is to Beijing.
All right, Dr. Burton, about a minute left here, but we know China has denounced this report as a fabrication. But what do we know so far about how the report is being perceived by the general public within China and their sentiments around all of this?
Well, China has described it, the foreign ministry spokesman says it's completely illegal and void, and proves once again that the OHCHR, the UN Human Rights Commission, has become a thug and accomplice of the US and the West. Well, I mean, this is complete and utter nonsense. That, the integrity of the UN process and their rigorous legality is well established. But people in China, because of the suppression of the internet and the flow of information into China, will not be aware of this report or its contents.
All right, lots to keep our eyes on as this situation develops. Dr. Burton, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you.
All right, stay with us. Forum Daily Week in Review. We'll be right back with a look at back to school with Wyatt Sharp. Stay tuned. We'll be back after a short break. Students in several school boards are back in classrooms today as a new academic year begins. But this time, it'll look a lot different than last year. Many schools are opening without COVID-19 restrictions for the first time since the pandemic began. This comes as advocates are raising concerns around a potential resurgence of COVID cases as kids get closer during in-person classes. Meanwhile, students are being encouraged to be kinder to each other and avoid bullying following 2 years of online learning and a potential lack of socialization during that time. But how are students themselves feeling as they return to what some would say is normal school life? Well, joining us now to tell us about his experience is Wyatt Sharp, journalist and show host. Wyatt, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you so much for having me, Nima. It's great to be back.
So let's start with your own personal experience, Wyatt. How was your learning affected during the pandemic?
Well, first of all, let me just say once again, thank you very much for having me back here on Forum Daily and on the News Forum Network. I think my experience has been relatively similar to the students across the province of Ontario. It hasn't been ideal for anyone. It's been really a matter of how have I and all of my peers here in Ontario been able to adjust to the current circumstances. As you said, this is really one of the first school years throughout the pandemic when we are going back to school without any restrictions. There's obviously mixed feelings about that. There's some people who say maybe more concerned with their safety because of that. And then there's some people who are now, looking at the current circumstances and they're kind of, they are, I guess, more relieved in a certain sense to be able to know that they don't have to have these restrictions. They don't have to wear a mask when going to school. But again, there is still that safety concern. I personally, wear a mask on, certain occasions when it feels right. Maybe when you're outside for recess, say, don't wear a mask, get outside, enjoy the time, and then go back inside, maybe put a mask back on. Just really, I think it really comes down to knowing the circumstances when it's appropriate. Definitely put a mask on. It's going to help yourself, it's going to help your peers, and will make for a safer environment.
So tell us a little bit more about how students are feeling themselves, Wyatt. Is COVID-19 still a concern for students, or is this more of a concern for adults and parents right now?
I personally would say that it is something that I'm thinking about. It's something that I know a lot of my peers are thinking about, especially at my age, going into grade 8, being 13. It's something that, we've heard about constantly. It's not just going to all of a sudden go away. It's an issue that COVID-19 has, really had an impact on the lives of students, educators, parents, etc. So it really is an issue that, it's not going to go from, being an issue that you hear about on a day-to-day basis to not at all. I personally am still concerned with COVID-19, seeing how relevant it is in various communities across the province, across the country. But again, knowing the circumstances, knowing that, some safety precautions have been taken this year, obviously not as many as in years past. So again, really an issue I think that is still very relevant on the minds of students, and then of course educators and parents as well.
All right, switching gears, Wyatt, we mentioned a lot of attention is being drawn to the issue of bullying. So how do you think the pandemic impacted bullying in schools?
I think I would personally say that it really is something that obviously a lot of people face. It's very unfortunate. Some people, maybe you could say, who choose to wear a mask may not be really welcomed with their decision to wear a mask, especially now that a lot of those mask mandates are lifted. You're no longer required to wear a face covering in school. There's obviously a lot of students who still choose to, and they need to be accepted for their choice, accepted for deciding to wear a mask. I've seen personally with some of my peers at school who choose to wear a mask, even myself, not necessarily, you could say, bullying, but there are sometimes comments you could say made about wearing a mask. Like I said, I personally look at those circumstances. I look at how it might be appropriate, listening to the advice of, public health experts, listening to the advice of, say, what your teachers might be saying, whether or not they feel it's appropriate to wear a mask. So again, looking at some of those precautions that have been taken, everyone has the right to make their own decision, whether that's wearing a mask, whether that's taking any other perhaps additional safety precautions. And for myself, wearing a mask again, sometimes, maybe not at other times. Obviously, it's a very different school year than in years past. But I would say definitely from the experience at my school that I currently go to, and et cetera, that I think that it really, people have been welcomed. Obviously, I know that's not the experience of a lot of schools across the province or across the country, but I mean, where I currently attend school, a lot of people are being welcomed in there, whether or not they decide to wear a mask, whether or not they decide not to wear a mask.
As the manhunt for the suspect in a stabbing rampage in Saskatchewan enters its fourth day, experts say it highlights gaps in the policing of rural areas. Justice Studies professor Rick Riddell at the University of Regina says police officers in Saskatchewan are often spread thin, with massive areas to patrol. Dr. Riddell says that can lengthen police response times, and it could hinder the ability to respond in the immediate aftermath of a serious crime before additional resources are brought in. Scott Blanford, a former police sergeant in London, Ontario, says while mass murders are rare in Canada, the recent stabbings highlight the cracks in the policing of rural areas and the challenges facing officers. Well, with us now to discuss the issues impacting rural policing is Dr. Rick Riddell, policing expert and professor at the University of Regina. Dr. Riddell, welcome to Forum Daily.
Well, thank you for having me.
So some very tragic events unfolded this weekend in Saskatchewan. Let's start with a brief overview of what we know so far about the recent mass stabbing on the James Cree Nation as well as the village of Weldon.
Well, these events happened on early Sunday morning, and there was a pretty immediate police response to that. There was initially 10 victims found who were murdered and 18 people who were wounded. And so a very serious crime, very complicated crime scene, as it was spread over two towns and the James Cree First Nation. So it was a challenge obviously a challenge for the police who responded. And since then, there's one suspect known to be at large, and that person is currently at large, and all police resources in the province are looking for that individual.
Now, we mentioned that experts are pointing to cracks in the policing of rural areas because of this case. So what sort of cracks could they be highlighting here?
Well, policing throughout rural Canada is spread really thin. So the amount of officers to cover such a big geographical area is scant. And I think that in Canada, we've been getting away with policing on the cheap in terms of rural areas. So I'll just give you one example. A response time in Ottawa, one of the very few places that actually publish their police response times. So in a serious incident, something involving violence or a serious injury, their average response time is 7 minutes. Now, if you go to the countryside in rural Saskatchewan, rural Alberta, even rural Northern Ontario, you might be very lucky to get a police response to a serious incident within 30 minutes to an hour. And it might even be longer depending on inclement weather or if the police resources are spread, not only spread thin, but say they're attending a collision somewhere else or another serious event. So a lot of people in the countryside feel pretty vulnerable about that, knowing that they're not going to get a very rapid response time, and they feel isolated and vulnerable.
Now, as you say, you can see these issues in rural or northern Ontario. So are these rural policing issues seen across the country, or are they unique to certain areas of Canada?
They're pretty much right across the board throughout Canada. And this is not a new sort of discovery. I'm on some committees that deal with international policing issues, and these are common in the United States, United Kingdom, and throughout Europe. Policing response times in the countryside are fairly poor for the most part. And that's not the fault of the individual officers. If there's only one person working on that shift, that's the only person who can respond, and they might be 30 to 50 kilometers away from a serious incident.
All right, Dr. Riddell, we've got about a minute and a half left here, so let's talk about some solutions. What kind of steps can our officials take to address rural policing, and what's at risk here if they don't?
Well, I'm not going to make people happy when I say in the environment that we're talking about defunding, but we actually probably need to increase funding for rural police services and to make sure that they have enough personnel on the job to get the job done. And also, there needs to be some expenditure in terms of community resources to bolster those rural communities in terms of addiction services, mental health services, and providing those supports to actually reduce crime. So just responding to crime isn't enough. We have to take a proactive step to reduce crime. One of the things that a lot of Canadians don't know is crime rates in rural Canada are quite a bit higher than urban Canada. And I don't think that many people are aware of that.
A lot of things to consider. Dr. Riddell, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at important conversations from this past week. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website at thenewsforum.ca and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. Thanks again for joining us today on the Forum Daily Week in Review, and we'll see you again next time.